Hallo Freunde, willkommen zurück zu .NET API Review. Es ist 10 Uhr, mehr oder weniger, in Redmond, Washington. Und wir haben wieder Issuen? What's issues, Emo?
I have no
Äh,
idea actually.
Issues.
Issues, that's how I call them in
Oh,
German.
it's Besprechungspunkte.
Yeah, sure. Let's go with that.
Themen. Vielen Themen.
Themen is actually good.
Yeah.
Uh, right. I think today's supposed to be the last API review for .NET 9 with emergency spillover things happening starting next week. We're hoping to get through two things today. Maybe we get some writers. But after that, .NET 9 should not gain any more API. We'll see how true that is.
I'm sure it will be false. But
So this is WPF issue 8932, Fluent Windows theme switch for WPF.
Yeah, who wants to talk about it?
Hello everyone. I will talk about this API. Myself Dipesh, and so getting started. So in .NET 9, we started making changes to support Fluent theme in WPF, and as of now, we have integrated the styles in a different theme library in WPF. So now the next step would be to provide the developers a way to switch themes from the app itself, and this proposal is regarding that. So going to the proposal part, so we basically want to introduce two simple CLR properties, one at application level and the other at window level. So and we want to mark them both as experimental for now, because there are a lot of more things that we need to discuss, like how it will be enabled in future and extensibility. So keeping that in mind, application.theme is a string-based property which will have four values: none, system, light, and dark. None will refer to the default theme, that is Aero 2 or the Windows 7, means the previous default theme that WPF has. System will correspond to the system changes itself, like it will correspond to Fluent, but developers will get the system theme changes. On the other hand, light and dark are like the light variation and dark variation of Fluent themes. So once those are set, the application won't get the system theme changes, except for the accent color changes, which will happen unanimously if Fluent is enabled. So this is the basic structure of the API. I think
I
that's.
have a few questions. Why string?
Okay. As of now, so historically, in like WPF, we used to load theme as a state of two things: theme name and theme color. So earlier we had like Luna metallic, Luna normal color, and those kind of stuff. With Fluent, although we have Fluent light and Fluent dark, but we are not sure how to provide the extensibility for that. Means suppose in future someone wants to implement a different colored version of Fluent themselves, right? And so if we provide a enum here, they will be kind of blocked. That's why we wanted to keep it as string. So that's the basic idea behind it.
So the
So
downside, the
Yeah.
big downside to string is discoverability. I have no idea what I can store into this thing. If you look at some other libraries, like Azure SDK addresses this with what they call string enums, which are basically little structs that wrap a string, and they have a constructor that accepts a string, so you can construct one with anything, but then they also on the type have static properties that, yeah, exactly like this. So there'll be a static property that returns you could have system, none, light, dark, all those properties. It looks kind of like an enum. You can still do theme equals themes dot dark, themes dot light, but you have the escape hatch of being able to say new theme Steve's cool color.
Yeah.
So you might consider something like that here, because just having string, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do with that.
Yeah.
Got it. Actually, since we were a little less like low on time here, so we wanted to keep things minimal and we sprung for the lowest set. So
Yeah, I mean, the
that
one thing I kind of said it in the comments as well. I mean, yes, you mark these APIs as experimental, but you still kind of want the user experience to be what you would expect to be a good user experience, right? And I think if you were to ship a public stable API, I don't think you would want it exposed like that, because as Steven said, the big problem is people have no idea what to parse in. Like, is it case sensitive? Is it case insensitive? Like, how do I even get to these values? And so it's just a massive speed bump for anybody who wants to get started, right? And I think, practically speaking, the struct-based approach, like, it's 100 lines of code or something like this. It doesn't really take multiple days to implement. So I feel like if you want customer feedback on your theming support, I would highly encourage you to do something that you think will look great and sexy in a blog post, and people are excited to use it and give you feedback on it. And then, yes, you will probably get a lot of feedback on extensibility, but given that there's a super, super straightforward escape hatch where you can just say new theme, Bob's theme, right? Like, you don't really corner yourselves into anything. You still have effectively the flexibility of string, but people know what to do with it. I think that's going to be, the other thing to keep in mind is, like, whenever you ship a preview API or experimental API, you want to minimize breaking changes down the road, right? Because otherwise, if you ship things that break people 100% of the time, the third or fourth iteration of experimental features, people are less likely to try it out, because they're like, well, if I start using it, I have to change my code 6 months down the road anyway, so I'll just wait, right? So you kind of want to get into the ballpark so that not every change you do to the API will break 100% of your early adopters, so that there's less of a penalty for people to use it, right? So if you already know that's not the shape you want, I would highly encourage you to go down something that is a bit more polished and probably closer to where your final API is. But yes, time is limited, but I think the struct does not. Like, it's not a massive design change to your stuff, in my opinion.
right. The struct won't be a massive design change, and struct in itself is good. Actually, designing the struct was something that we were not sure on. Like, the properties here, that application theme and window theme, will probably remain the same as it is, like, in future. But with struct, actually, what we are trying is, like, see, if a user wants to provide theme color separately, or some custom theme color, and theme name separate, that can also be custom. So if it's two parts, then how do we deal with a single struct? That was like, that's where we started differing, and that's why we, like, did not put it in. But if if we put in the struct as experimental, and we can get it changed, like if there is that, obviously with experimental there can be changes, but yeah, if there is an option for change, then I don't think we have any problem with like, adding the struct for now.
I mean, in general, like, anything that's experimental is fair to change, right? That's the promise we make to our customers. I mean, it's a weird promise, but we have changed experimental APIs. And so if they start using the API, they get a compiler error, so they have to opt into this thing. So in that sense, I think it's fine. But I think the problem is you want something that is, as close to a polished API as you can make it effectively, right? And yes, you don't have to handle everything. I mean, the other thing I kind of wanted to talk about down the road is, because we have the WinForms guys here as well, is like the interplay between WinForms and WPF. My understanding is you guys haven't really talked to each other yet much about those features, but WinForms is also adding support for dark mode. So one of the questions is, well, once you host WinForms in WPF and vice versa, like, do you get same behavior if I set dark mode in WPF? Throw in a WinForms control, is the WinForms control now in dark mode? Ideally, yes, right? But I think those are the other questions that we probably have to figure out after we ship, because we don't have enough runway to determine this behavior, right? So yeah, I would expect some changes, but I think get closer to the final would be my advice. I assume that's system or Windows, right? Because that's everything else.
Yeah,
right?
Everything else is in system Windows, and this will be there.
And then the other thing is like experimental requires a diagnostic ID. Do you guys already have one, or should we just assign one?
We don't have any diagnostic ID right now, so if you can assign one.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where we store them. We have a file somewhere on our side where we keep track of all the IDs so we don't have duplicates. I suspect we want to have a prefix like WPF because that makes the most sense, and then some 4-digit number. Klaus, you about to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to ask exactly that. I mean, we had the discussion for WinForms that we kind of unify the IDs for WinForms, and I think we went for WFO now, so that we have 3 letters. Those IDs, will they have the prefix WinForms or WPF or anything else then? That's my actual question.
So what do you mean by that, if anything else? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, is there for experimental...
do experimental have their own prefix? No, we don't. In general, we treat all diagnostics pretty much as just an ID, and then the prefix is usually the team or feature area, because the idea is they are effectively in charge of not having duplicates in their digits. If you just have digits for everybody, that's not going to fly very well. So usually the prefix is a team or component. We try to move away from 3 letters alone because most stuff doesn't really have, obvious abbreviations, but WPF and WinForms, given how long they have been used, WFO is fine, probably. WinForms would be fine because it's still short enough. The problem is we don't want namespace qualified names in there. We generally want something a bit more compact because it shows up in the error list in VS, right? So you don't want 40-line character strings, but you want something unique enough. So
personally,
when the WPF something would be fine.
Personally, I'm thinking when the prefix is too long, then it really takes away the emphasis on the actual number. So, really WinForms as the whole prefix is kind of, I don't know. And then you also have to always widen the column to actually see it, and then the number gets lost then. So I prefer rather shorter numbers. I'm
not saying but I'm just saying WinForms to me will be the threshold of what I would consider a maximum prefix, right? Because it's
sure.
But
I'd probably go with Whiskey Foxtrot Romeo Mike.
WFRM, yeah, that works too. Like 4 digits is probably fine as well.
That's just what else we do. Yeah.
I mean, for this one, it's WPF, right? So we would just say WPF probably because that makes the most sense. Assuming you don't have anything yet, 00001 seems like a good starting point. And then we should probably follow the same convention we have in other places. I don't know what we do. I think we have a file somewhere checked in with the numbers, but maybe Steven knows more. But there's some file that we have on the runtime repo. Probably want something similar in the WPF repo.
Yeah, well, at least we do for obsolescence. I don't even know if we actually have anything experimental yet in runtime.
I thought all the math stuff was, but maybe I'm wrong.
And at one point, we had a bunch of requires preview stuff that all shipped. We're about to have experimental stuff with tensors, but that hasn't gotten merged yet, to my knowledge. I can't think of any other place we actually use this today, so I don't know if we have any.
Looks like extensions has some stuff.
Yeah.
But by runtime you mean Corlib, right?
I mean the runtime repo.
Oh, I mean. So yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't see anything.
Dipesh, you were asking a question?
Yeah. So do we need to add a file with this diagnostic ID in our repo as well separately, or?
So I didn't quite understand the question.
You need to manage your IDs. We manage them
Yeah.
in .NET runtime by having one file. That way, it's obvious that somebody stomped on a number before you got to it, and that you need to pick a bigger number. So, whatever
The
makes
general
sense for your
idea is
repo.
that, like in your case, what you see on screen right now, we apply the experimental attribute in 3 places, right? So the idea is that all 3 places would have the same diagnostic ID. So when it doesn't really matter what of the APIs the person is using, they get the same diagnostic, and then they suppress that one diagnostic, and it will turn off all the diagnostics for all the APIs that you marked with the same diagnostic ID, right? So that, let's say WPF ships 2 preview features, let's say one for theming and one for, I don't know, like some accessibility feature, for example, then they would have separate diagnostic IDs, and then users can opt into one but not the other, right? So they can make an educated decision, how much of a breaking change that they take on, right? Like how much do you care about the features? To avoid the problem that somebody turns on one feature and suddenly like every single library in the world can now, slip in with preview features, right?
Okay.
That's why the IDs have to be unique too, so that you don't accidentally turn on somebody else or turn off somebody else's feature.
Yeah, so
yeah, that's what it looks like for us, right? We use syslib as the prefix.
Got it. Yeah.
All right. YouTube chat has mentioned high contrast. Is high contrast a theme, or is high contrast some sort of orthogonal vector?
It's more of an orthogonal vector. So whenever high contrast will be enabled on the system, we will like by default provide the high contrast version. And once we switch back, we will return to whatever is set here.
So basically, high contrast would override whatever theme you have here, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do the same.
Yeah, I think I remember the discussion with Klaus.
Okay, so high contrast is not itself considered a theme.
Right.
It's also a system level setting, right? It's not an app level thing, right? Usually.
Yeah, it's a system level setting, and there's a parameter which we usually check, and if that's enabled, we basically apply the high contrast variation.
Okay. Yeah, so I made up the theme name for the strongly typed string. That was just to put something on the screen that we can talk about.
I mean, it works for me.
So, just to point out, like theme name in WPF generally, like in the implementation stuff, it means either Luna, Arrow 2, and color is treated separately. So it can be kind of an issue there.
Okay. Is there a different name?
No, it's just that theme is combined of theme name and theme color, and we are already using theme name for the properties. I think means for now it's okay.
Sorry, I didn't follow that. So you call something else theme already? Is that what you're saying?
So in WPF, like there is a like a separate system which loads like the default Arrow 2 theme like by default, and that is separate from how we are doing it right now. There are there are some blockers in that area, like blockers like we cannot do some kind of searching and stuff for now in those resources. That's why we are including them as like implicitly styled resource dictionaries in app.saml or window resources, in app resources or window resources.
I guess my high level point is it sounded like you were concerned about the theme name because that would conflict. But if that conflicts, then so does theme.
So that actually we don't refer to it as theme, but theme style in WPF. So there's an internal property which loads the default theme, and that is mentioned as theme style. So I was sticking with that nomenclature. So
I guess my point is if you consider theme name to conflict with theme style, then theme also conflicts with theme style. if theme doesn't conflict logically with theme style, then theme name shouldn't either.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps
So
the confusion is because there is a property on system parameters called theme name, which isn't a theme name and is possibly the other theming system.
So it refers to arrow to like the previous themes of XP 7 and that time. And at that time, if you'll see, there's one more property, UX theme color.
Mhm.
So both of these combined together was referred to as the theme of the system.
Right, but in your original proposal where you didn't introduce the strongly typed string, you still called the property theme. So
Yeah, because
if you think theme is the right name for the property, then theme name
I
seems
don't
to
think
be
there's anything wrong with calling the struct theme, right?
we could call it theme, but if theme is gonna get other state bolted onto it, I don't know if it's a strongly typed string or if it's a more complicated thing at that point. That's why I weaseled out and said theme name.
Yeah. I mean, for reference, in Maui it's called app theme, but that's somewhat confusing here because you can set the app theme at the window level, in which case it's kind of weird. But
What component calls it app theme?
Maui,
Oh, okay.
they have an app theme which is basically none, dark, and light, I think.
Yeah, it's an enum. Yeah. Okay, I see it.
I think most people refer to light and dark as themes. So, I mean, I've heard color theme, I've heard color scheme, but they all seem kind of worse than something named theme. Like, I'm fine with theme name. I think the problem, as Steven says, to my opinion, is you have logical overloading of theme in WPF due to the way the resource dictionaries are used there. So I think anything named theme will have that problem that people have to kind of understand what is what. And so in that sense, I think whether you have it called theme or theme name, to me, that's all the same. Like, it doesn't really make it worse.
Are we looking to obsolete the old? Should I think of it as old and new, and the old ones we don't want anyone to use anymore? Or is there a world in which you use both of them, or you prefer the old one over the new one?
So old one has its own advantages and it enables various scenarios which are not currently present to the developers. So ultimately we would want to like load the fluent themes in as default or as the old in the old situation. And there, like one thing that we can do is like we can rename it to theme style name maybe, because ultimately like in future when we are moving it to the old scenario, we will be loading these themes into a property named theme style, although that is internal and not visible to public, but that's what it is like. So with any framework element, there is a theme and theme style available. Sorry, there is style and theme style available. Theme style usually refers to what the OS has. So, yeah.
So it might be worth noting that at the OS level, Windows calls the overarching concept theme, and then dark versus light is considered the mode. And then there's a separate accent color that you can provide in addition to the mode. I'm not a huge fan of mode, but I figured it's worth calling out that that's what the system itself calls it.
So just one remark, we called the feature to opt into dark mode and not theme because we wanted to make it clear that we are not going down the route of theming at all, because it would completely go against the third parties. They have their own theming APIs and they are not obviously compatible and would really, stir them up. So we just call it dark mode and you can opt in or not. And that's pretty much it.
How do you handle mapping to what the system default is?
We have an enum, and the enum has inherits, and then enabled, disabled, and not supported. Not supported is something that can report it back if we're on Windows 7, for example, still. If you set it to inherits, then if the system is opt into dark mode, we take over dark mode. If the system is light mode, we take over light mode. If we enable it, then we force dark mode, and if we disable it, which is the default, to not break existing apps, then we just render visual XP visual styles.
I see. I assumed you meant that dark mode was a Boolean property, but you mean it's actually an enum property.
Yeah.
With the same 4 states as presented here, just different names.
Yeah. Someone just had their hands up briefly. Was that a mistake, or?
I think it was Pavlov.
Yeah, actually, Stephen, to answer your question, right? These structs that we are introducing, they actually make sense with respect to the new Fluent theme that we have. So these properties, except for the none one, if you opt in none, you are using the old theme. So if you don't set none, basically it means like you're using the Arrow 2 themes. For Fluent, when you are in this world where you're using Fluent themes, that's where the other properties would make sense. So going forward, we expect like themes to actually evolve in this direction, where you can actually customize light modes, or you can customize what colors you want in dark mode, and basically the evolution path would be in that front. So right now, your question about like what would be the overlap should not be like there. We're not envisioning any overlap right now. So it's like you either use the Fluent theme where you will get all these properties that you can play with, or you sort of stick with the old one, and whatever Arrow 2 or Luna or Aquatic would provide, like that's the color scheme that you would use.
It sounds like very similar to WinForms, right? You're either in this mode or that mode, and then like WinForms basically doesn't have light mode, right? It's effectively you say you want dark mode or you don't want dark mode, which basically means you get light mode, right? And in your case, you just switch between light, dark, and you can say system, or you can turn it off altogether with none. Which,
yes,
I mean, I would say just pick a name for this. I mean, you can keep almost any name at this point, right? You can call it color theme, you can call it color scheme, you can call it the UI theme, theme name, theme. I think they all make sense somehow. It seems like a developer will have to understand that there is more than one mechanism you have. The old mechanisms, whatever it is, whatever names were used there, because they're APIs that are like 15 years old or something. And so I would just pick a name that you like here. Like it almost doesn't matter in my opinion.
Yeah, chat suggested theme mode, which I think also came up as what the OS calls it.
Yeah, that works.
That works with the current scenario actually. So theme mode.
Do we want both the struct and the property to be named theme mode?
Actually,
at that point, yeah.
Properties, I would still want them to be theme, but struct, like with the current options that we are providing, theme mode is actually the best way that we can describe here. But yeah, as I mentioned, that if we want to provide customizations, then it will be much more than just the modes. Like they could provide a whole new set of, like, moving ahead, if we get Fluent 3 and we want to support both of them. So this doesn't clarify if we are using Fluent 2 or Fluent 3 variation of the theme. So I means at this point, either theme or a theme name is fine. But yeah, and looking forward for the future, I would still say that theme name would be better, I guess, although it's conflicting.
Well, it'd be weird to call the struct theme mode in the property theme name.
Yeah. Like I think one of the reasons to name them the same is because they're ultimately the same thing, right? Like one is the type, one of them is the thing. Like usually you only name them differently if one is the suffix or prefix of the other, which you can argue is here the case, right? But like theme and theme mode are really fairly different things usually. So I don't know, like, again, for me, it's your API, you decide, but I would generally say, if you feel strongly that the type should be called theme mode, I don't quite understand why we would name the property theme mode as well. It seems the more obvious candidate. Well, it's a preview API, so just pick one, and then if it's wrong.
Then it's then yeah, sorry, Pankaj.
Yeah, I think at this point, like I'm like theme should. So the question actually would be, how much are we allowed to change it in future? Like, although this is marked experimental, but we would like to keep it close. But let's suppose, like, going further down the line, we actually find a better, well-suited name that actually does describe the purpose that the property is supposed to serve. How much are we allowed to change?
Everything. I'm just saying, like, even in a preview API, you don't want to just willy-nilly change names because it screws over your customers, right? But like ultimately, like, yeah, everything that's marked as preview or /experimental, any names, any change is fine. You can remove the property, make them completely in different types. You can rename them. Any change is fair game, in my opinion. I would just try to say, like, don't just ship things that for sure you don't want to have. Because it's an experimental API. I would just say try to ship a stable API, but if for whatever reason it turns out that this was the wrong decision, well, then you change it. Obviously, that's the whole point of experimental.
Okay, so in that case, this the theme mode and the property name, like they being separate, like it does not look consistent with other .NET APIs, I believe. So I mean, I'd rather err on the side of being consistent. So theme mode would be the property name that I'm inclined to, but I would like to know your opinion on that.
Yeah. I agree.
I mean that's generally the pattern, as you said. I mean, the thing that the color property is, has the type color, the name is color usually, unless it's foreground color, background color, right? In which case, yeah, you differ because it's different concepts, right? But in this case, it's like, yeah, to me, theme and theme mode are just different things. So it would be weird to have different names.
Okay. So
if later on you decide theme mode was the wrong name because it's really a theme at this point, well, then you just rename the struct and the property and call it a day.
Got it.
Also, Jeremy, don't forget to update line 27.
So mode is what we're going for here.
Yeah, I've in the past I've just called it always value, because then it always worked.
Sure, value.
Oops. Probably wrong, but whatever.
Definitely not. It's the thought that counts.
All right, and finally, is none the right thing to say that the mode is in, or should it be legacy, classic, default, arrow, potato, like?
To me, none makes actually the most sense because, like, the way this works right now is basically you're saying, don't honor this thing, just do what you did previously, right? I would not call it default because to me, system and default is almost the same thing because you basically just say take whatever the system configured, right?
But one of the weird things about that though is that you have an explicit none singleton, which is different than default of T.
Yeah, I mean, you could say it's null, but then I don't know, like a nullable property is so much more work.
In this case, none would actually mean none is the placeholder that would, if you were to inquire this mode in an arrow 2 place, you should get theme property as none, like you haven't said anything. So it's more of a placeholder rather than actual having some meaning to it. So if you were to go ahead and find out what application.theme mode is, then you would actually get system light or dark only when you are in fluent zone, like if you have included fluent styles. If not, then like none of this property should matter and you should get the value of theme none. Like the other alternative was to actually return a null value, but then that creates a problem as to what does null actually mean. So
actually,
none
I was
becomes
just
that
thinking like
placeholder.
we implement this struct. We can do whatever we want. We can say that if you say the default instance where the underlying value is null, it behaves like it's none. So when you do toString, you get none. If you compare it with none, it returns true, right? We can just make default of t and none identical, right?
So we basically make the value property just return none in that case.
Yeah.
Okay.
We just cheat. We just say
Yeah.
default of t and none is the same thing. You can't observe a different behavior.
That's fine by me.
Actually, we can go either route. Like
Right.
the idea behind that was like if you were to inquire that property on an older app, what is the value that we should be getting, and
Yeah.
none seemed an approach back
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
So
Or unspecified.
I mean, I would go with none because if you model this after an enum, that's what it's usually called in an enum, right? We don't really use
Right.
unspecified in enums. It's like none is more or less the most common.
Okay. So, Emo, you think that? Basically just make the property lie and say
Yeah.
null is none?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I assume you model equality over the property, not the field. But yes.
All right, and I
That doesn't
think
really matter anymore,
strongly
yes.
typed strings are just I-equatable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm looking at hash algorithm name, it's just I-equatable.
Oh, right. I can't find it because it's a different program. And then I think read only.
Yeah.
All right.
Sweet. Are we all happy then?
Yep.
actually, a quick question to Klaus. Would we be able to get this thing uniformly supported in WinForms side as well, right?
Yeah. I think this is the thing you probably want to take offline because I suspect it takes longer. I think I had a brief conversation with Klaus about this, and I think what you really want to do is you want to basically play with the hosting in each other, right? You want to instantiate a WinForms control, put it in WPF and vice versa, and then figure out what is the behavior that you want. And I mean, there's multiple facets to this. There's what happens when you just create an app and you don't change any settings, do you get consistent behavior between the two? And then what happens when you change at the various levels, right? If you change it at the application level and the window level, because WinForms has very similar, kind of like ways to do this, and just make sure the behaviors you observe make sense. I think the big trouble might be in your current world right now, you only have really, light mode, dark mode, and then system is more or less saying, you pick light and dark based on what the system has configured, but so it's still just light and dark. That kind of matches with what WinForms has, because WinForms is just dark mode on off, which more or less is the same thing at that point. The problem is when you go down the path of allowing custom theming, that's where WinForms just won't have it, because WinForms will only have dark mode and that's it. So if you have a fancy mode at some point, then you just say, sorry, that's not supported by WinForms. But for me, that's kind of the same problem that you have in general when you host WinForms in WPF, where you have some weird-ass transform in a WPF control that rotates it by 45 degrees. Yeah, your WinForms control can't do that, right? So
Exactly.
it's more like the default, layouting will put the control where you expect it to be. But, when you do more fancy stuff, then at some point, it just doesn't work anymore. And that to me seems like in the spirit of what you have here as well.
Yeah.
I mean, don't forget that we neither have the event doubling that you have in WPF, nor do we have like a central place for styling. So pretty much every control brings its own adornments by really hard painting, and also it brings its own designers for the design time experience, and that makes it fundamentally different from WPF. We make, so we took care of that you can, for a control that you own, and that's user controls often in the context of line of business apps where you mix WPF and WinForms, that you can opt out and opt in on control level, so that the user actually can influence what they are doing. I think that's the most important part. But how we can pick up on a general theming inside of a WinForms control that you defined, so to say, in the parent object of a WPF app, I don't really know if that is easily working or even desirable. But that's details that we can talk about offline, yes.
All right. Happy?
Yep.
No, I guess just questioning myself, since we called the property value, should we call the string here theme mode or value? Or do we care?
Probably value, because that way
Matches
people
the
looking
property.
at it know that it matches a property.
Yeah. I was just about to say that, yeah.
Also, for whatever reason, if you're doing something like deserializing it, the deserializer can match the two.
Yep. Boom.
I'm going to go punish myself for suggesting somebody deserialize one of these things.
You deserve it.
I deserve lots of punishment for my many transgressions.
Alright. Find this window, move it back off screen. Okay. Surprise! Introduce dark mode and whatever A11Y compatible visual styles for apps targeting Net9 and Win11. This is changing repositories WinForms 7641.
Yeah. I just did a minor change on the last minute. Can you make sure that you refresh the page so that everything is fine? Okay. So background of that is that we are getting new requirements for accessibility, starting I think in July 2025, and those basically say that we have a minimum real estate requirement of 25 by 25 pixels, and there are a couple of controls in WinForms that just, in some settings wouldn't apply to that. And the other thing is that dark mode was one of the most requested features that we had, and so the motivation is to bring those things together to be able to address them during the next year and lay the foundation of that, and at the same time to also satisfy the need for being as backwards compatible as possible, which means that if a third-party vendor relies on the implementation of the old XP-styled version of, let's say, the text box, then they should still be able to do that. And if we change how we are rendering them, or if we give them more real estate to render, then they're broken, and that we can't have. That is the background first of the sliding. So let's start with the dark mode itself. I talked about that, or I mentioned that before. So we made sure that we don't use the term theming anywhere for the reasons that we don't also ever will go down in really complete anything that has to do with theming. So we would just want to reflect the dark mode and the light mode, and those are the two options that we have. And if you really do if you need to do real theming, then you're better off in using like DevExpress, Telerik, Grape City, and what have you. And so to control that, there's something like an established style to do that on application level, and then a couple of properties that we have on application are then ambient is what we call them down to control. So which means if you enable dark mode in the application object, and then you have as a standard or as a default property on control the dark mode also set to inherits, then the whole thing is ambient, meaning every control in every nested container will also then be dark mode. We have an additional property or enum inherits because usually the chain ends at the application object, but with dark mode that's not the case, because we take also over the setting from the system, which means if application defines the dark mode enabled, then we have like a dark theme. If we do disabled, we have a light theme. But if we set it to inherits, then application object looks at the system, what is enabled there, and takes over that. And that is why we have that additional option for the ambient flow, if you will, and that goes down then to control. So at every level, if for some reason the default dark mode implementation doesn't work for you, you can in your own control opt out. We have on control a couple of new APIs where we set for the control the default dark mode that gets honored on instantiation, and then and according to that we are then dealing with the setup of the control as it needs to have it. And so there are a couple of additional properties here, like environment dark mode and is dark mode enabled on application. And the environment dark mode is just if I need to query what is set up in the environment for some reason, then that will give me the current setting. That can be not supported, enabled or disabled, of course. Inherits doesn't make sense in that context. And then is dark mode enabled would then at any point give me if the dark mode is enabled. So not what is the dark mode that is enabled in the system, but is the Windows app set up for dark mode at that point, so that I can make for, let's say, an inherited control a decision based on the current environment that the user set for the whole application. There's one, so it gets a little bit mixed now with accessibility and with dark mode, and I can tell you what I mean. Can you scroll up to one of the GIFs that I have? Stop that one. So this is shown a typical form in WinForms now in 150 dpi. But one of the problems that we already have for accessibility reasons is if this is shown in 96 dpi, our text box that does not have a border is only 18 pixels high. And the problem with text box is that it cannot define a padding. So even if we wanted to, like make the real estate bigger, we cannot do that because the original Win32 control inside of Windows doesn't support that. We can do that with like rich text box, we can do that with a multi-line control, but the text box itself doesn't really give us the option. And now we did some tricks, and so we were able to do that, but the problem here is now also that we obviously need to define a padding, so we have the real estate to draw a rounded border, for example, around that. And the problem is that, and no one could answer me that question, or the original definition of the padding property in text box base is that it shadows the padding of the control to just disable it. So it says new padding, it marshals that the whole thing down to the basic implementation, and then it sets the attributes so that I would not see it in the property grid, and I wouldn't get IntelliSense for it. And my question is now, if we undo, so if we unshadow the padding implementation, what we just knew, because now for accessibility reasons for textbooks, we need that padding. Is that a breaking change? Like a binary breaking change? And that's my concern I wanted to ask, because I couldn't find an answer for that.
So, Jeremy, I know you've had experience in the past with introducing new property, new virtual overrides in crypto classes, and existing compiled DLLs did not call the override that you anticipated that they would call.
Right. So on this one, because you're clearly asking about this minus line.
Yeah.
So in general, members can move down. So I think as long, like, the fact that you had to use new means that there is a property beneath you. And removing it, I think the CLR will, it'll just be like, well, there wasn't a new slot to call, so obviously this moved down to control. And it'll be like, whatever. So I think it'll work. I mean, the easy answer is build something for net 8, run it on net 9, and see if you crash.
Well, control has a property called padding of a different type.
If it's a different type, then that'll break, because the signature won't. Because the signature includes the return type.
Yeah, but
there's no existing property text box based on padding, so I don't know why there's a minus here.
So on control, there is the padding property. So we inherited, and then it was originally overwritten, well, shadowed actually. But since it was shadowed, it could not call the infrastructure of the original implementation, which we need now. Now, the easiest way to make it work again would be to just undo the shadowing, so we have still, text box base again set up to the normal flow that it originally was, and then we're dealing with the padding. The problem is that the text box in a single line control never was actually able on the Win32 API side to do that, but there is a way to do it. And we did that, and it works fine. But it's just now that we would undo the shadowing and have it not shadowed, but have the padding as every other control and not disabled.
By the way, the comment that I made earlier about it's a different type, I was looking at WPF, not WinForms, sorry.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Right.
So that would explain that.
So yes, WinForms has padding on control, and then I guess APIs of .NET doesn't render the keyword new. So, but this has different attributes, so it's clearly a different instantiation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so since the signatures match, I believe you can remove the new and it'll flow. Like, I don't think they get a depth marker of how many news they've overridden, so it's not like it's looking for padding, 5.
Okay.
It's just looking for padding, and it'll just find one on a higher type.
So I would have tested that, but Jeremy, when he did, our Jeremy, when he did the review, or my first review a couple of days ago, he pointed that out, and it didn't occur to me beforehand, and so that is the reason I have not tested it yet. I'm sorry. So that is for the reasoning for the visual for the dark mode, and so the visual styles, which is the next point.
Well,
no, that's okay.
Can we talk about
First
this
of all,
point before we move on to another one?
Yeah. No. Okay. So first of all, are there any questions about this implementation so far?
Well, I'll start with I believe inherits should be inherited. Because everything else is, you can say dark mode is not supported, dark mode is enabled, dark mode is disabled, dark mode is inherits.
That's true.
That's not the same part of speech. So inherited, I think, is a more consistent name.
Yes.
So then,
yes.
Why do you have a static get, or a static get only property and a static set that's not the property? Oh, I guess so what's the bool on set default dark mode?
So first of all, if you go to a screenshot that is up there that shows you how WinForms classically implemented the existing APIs for doing that. For example, we have a default font property on application, but then we have the set default font. We have a set high DPI mode method, but then we have the high DPI mode property. And in your second question is bool actually returns if the dark mode could have been enabled or not. I'm actually not sure at this point if that is the. Yeah, I think.
So it's like return false. I'm Win7.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say if the method succeeded or not. To what you ever wanted to set up. I need to look up if that is if that is the same with the other methods. But I try to be completely as compatible to what we had already. And that is that's the reason for that.
Okay. And then so environment dark mode was whether the OS is in dark mode?
Yes.
Does anyone object to using environment for that concept, or think we need to call it system or host or OS or anything else? Sounds like
what was the decision for environment versus OS, or even Windows?
I don't know. I never thought about. So for me, I never thought about it. It just came to my mind, and I used it. I found it intuitive.
But I can give a really bad argument as to why environment might not be a good word. You could imagine the operating system like a car, for instance, the user interface actually dynamically changing between light and dark based on an ambient light sensor on the device. At that point, environment would literally mean like it would imply the physical environment that the machine is actually like located in the real world, as opposed to what the OS is configured to do.
That's true.
It's a stretch, but
no, it's fine. And I'm absolutely no. I mean, I'm not a native English speaker, and so I'm rather like open to suggestions to for those things. And I mean, it's really an easy fix. So I'm fine with system or yeah.
Yeah, I think system dark mode would. So default dark mode is how things. Well, I'm trying to rationalize. There's so many things called dark mode here.
I mean,
this one's for your application, and this one's what the OS is doing.
Exactly, and the default dark mode is settable because that is the default that then goes down to control, and the system dark mode would then be just what is my host, or what is the host's state in terms of
So
theme.
why is it default dark mode? If default dark mode is this application,
Yeah.
then what's the difference between that and is dark mode enabled? Is dark mode enabled is the same as default dark mode equals enabled or inherited, and environment dark mode equals enabled?
Well, if the default dark mode is inherits, then dark mode would return no. So let's say that, I take the names now that we have, because otherwise it's getting confusing, right? So if the environment dark mode would return enabled, and you would set the default dark mode to inherits, then is dark mode enabled on control would return true. If you would set the system to light and you restart your app, then it would obviously be a light mode. Then the default dark mode, since it still inherits, would take over the light mode setting, and then the control would report back disabled because you are not in dark mode.
Why do you have to restart the app? It doesn't have a way of detecting a change at the system level and reflecting that?
Not in the version we talked about that. The problem is with styling later that in WinForms you can also not change the styling on the fly, and the reason is that we when we're opting out of what's now called the XP styles, then under the covers we're using either the Common Control version 5 or the Common Controls version 6, and that demands a new start. And we were thinking about having an additional application event where we would detect the change, but this is nothing that we can make in .NET 9 reliably, even not experimental, because it's just more work to do that we didn't do yet. So that is something that we would need to take on for .NET 10.
I guess maybe part of the confusion that people are having is that, like, you have something that is really like an operating system setting, the environment dark mode, system dark mode, whatever it is, hanging off of the application class. And I'm looking at all of the APIs on application, and none of them really seem to reflect an OS level setting. They all seem to be application level things, rather than like, oh, here's a convenient way to get at something that is basically system.environment.
Yeah.
Also, some of the dark mode properties wouldn't seem to make sense for environment dark mode. Like, do not supported and inherits make sense for environment dark mode?
No, but
assuming Win 7 doesn't have dark mode, then not supported would make sense on Win 7.
Yeah, and it would never return inherits, obviously. Yeah, it would return not supported, enabled or disabled. But I mean, it's a read-only property anyway.
Well, what's the difference between disabled and not supported in that capacity?
But I mean, in Windows 7, you could not even enable it, right?
But this doesn't have a setter. So it's just isn't this just really just telling you a Boolean of whether it's dark mode or not?
Pretty much. I think the only one that's special is inherits, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't apply to system or to environment.
That's true, yeah.
So we're getting the questions in chat, and we're now talking about the Boolean and finite nature of these values. In WPF, this was modeled as an open concept where someone can specify strings, and here you've modeled it as a closed concept where it's a 4-valued enum. Which one of you is right?
I had a similar question, which is, are these differences in APIs based on everything else that's in Windows Forms versus WPF, or some specific nature, or is it the opinion of the developers that are proposing these APIs and their aesthetics?
But I mean, I took a look at the what WPF was doing, and just the term theming makes it different, I think, for WinForms, because we deliberately always said that we're not adapting any sorts of theming. We just want to support or give our customers the ability to adapt and safely opt in if they want to when the system is in dark mode, so that they can, well, style their app accordingly. But this is only for dark mode, because that's part of an accessibility thing. WPF explicitly named it theming, and that is something that is fundamentally, I think, different between WPF and WinForms. So, and I mean, and some of us earlier said also that Windows does this differentiation between theming and the dark mode, and we had that discussion in the chat before to that topic, where I also said yes, you can conceptually see it as a kind of theming, but it shouldn't be called theming, because we decided that we would never in WinForms really introduce a real full-blown theming, because it would just disrupt the existing third-party ecosystem too much.
Right. So I guess my question is, when you're getting this data for environment dark mode or whatever it becomes called later, are you getting back from Windows a string? Are you getting a Boolean? Are you getting an enum or an integer that's only allowed to be 0 or 1? Like, what does the OS consider this to be?
Well, it is enabled, it is disabled, or it is not supported.
Can we remove not supported as an option? Because like the only Windows like OS that's still supported that doesn't support dark mode is Server 2012. That exits ESU in 2 years, and we can just document, like, do a version check if you really care about this, and the property will return disabled, but it really means not supported when you're on this one OS that goes out of support in 2026.
That's true, yeah. So the reason I implemented it to begin with was I was asking, is .NET 9 running on Windows 7 at all? Because I didn't support it first, and then I would be getting different answers, and like people said yes, and then it might, and no, and since I know that especially WinForms apps are still running on Windows 7, I just wanted to be safe than sorry, I guess, and that was the reason I changed that. I mean, if we say, let's just disregard that it can only be enabled or disabled, all the better, because then it's getting so much easier for and more understandable to do that.
I'm still trying to understand what it even affects. If the OS tells you not supported versus the OS tells you disabled, what do you do differently?
But I mean, it depends on if you are a third-party control vendor, or even you do your third-party controls inside of your own apps, and let's say you're running in a mixed mode environment, insofar that let's say 50 of your machines are Windows 7, 50 on your machines are Windows 10, then you probably want to know, because you could potentially render dark mode for your control, even for your app, without the operating system supporting it, just because you render your controls as you want it to. But then you probably want to know if that should not be done under any circumstances in a Windows 7 app. And so you just want to know, is that a general thing to be supported or not?
But that's what I'm missing. Is if I have the ability to render the control regardless of OS support, why do I care whether the OS support is not supported or whether it's disabled?
I don't know, maybe Maybe it's my German mentality for rules.
Well,
have
I
no
think
idea.
you were saying that like you might look
But-
up some other configuration if the
Yeah.
OS is saying I can't give you an answer, right? But like the argument that I was making earlier, and I think Steve is kind of alluding to this as well, is like this really seems like a moment in time problem. Like if we're saying that this feature will ship fully in .NET 10, that means that there's literally less than 1 year that this is ever going to be a problem for customers. So
Yeah.
why are we conflating the API surface to support it?
It's fine. Yeah, I cannot. Yeah, it's maybe easier to get rid of than not supported.
Also, the WinForms behavior is you have to have dark mode on at the OS level in order to dark mode the app, right? Is that not true?
No, not necessarily.
The
So I
OS
can have
could
the
say
OS
light,
in-
and you could call set default dark.
Yes, even if the environment mode would return disabled.
So then, but if the OS doesn't support it, that will blow up, right?
Not necessarily, but there is a risk that it does. Yes, it depends on the controls that you're using.
Wait, is that the only reason that set default dark mode returns a bool, because you might be on an OS that doesn't support it?
That was my original thinking. Yeah.
So from what I said earlier, that should just be void. Like make it throw an exception if you're running down level.
Yeah. I mean, it kind
It's
of makes
fine with
sense
me, really.
to have a query mechanism if you really cared enough, but like, I mean, if the only thing that it changes is like if the developer or if the application can turn on dark mode, right? And basically, if you have a picker in your app, let's say, right, like what most websites do, or like a setting somewhere, then it might make sense to disable that setting if you can't turn it off because it throws an exception, right? In which case, you might want to query that. But I would probably, I'd rather model this as a Boolean property that is differently named than as a member of that enum that now every single thing that talks about dark modes has to basically somehow meaningfully support.
Yeah, I have no problems with that.
In which case, if that's what we go down with, then maybe we don't need an enum at all, right? Maybe that's just Booleans all the way down then.
Well, then I think Klaus made a good argument earlier as to why, at the very least, you might want to tri-state in certain places, right?
Yeah,
like,
that one I believe. Like
Yeah.
but WinForms has that in other places already, right? Where I don't think it always models the tri-state.
Sure.
What just happened? Oh,
No, we're good.
okay. You just got the blue screen, and for a moment I was like, oh my god, Jeremy turned on dark mode, and the whole OS crashed.
So how would you then? So if we just wanted to have Boolean, how would you then automatically take over the setting that you have in? I mean, you would need to code that, right? Like you would query the environment dark mode and then set it to the application default mode based on what that returns, and it could not be done automatically. Keep in mind, we have in WinForms also the option to have those set statements for the application object generated, and that's something that we then wanted to do so that you can put them into the project settings. It would just be nice to then have an easy configuration way to just say like inherited, enabled, or disabled, so that there's, I mean, it's the typical WinForms style. Do as much as possible with the designer, so that we have just a click to take the system setting or force it to be enabled or force it to be disabled.
I don't think we were saying get rid of the notion of the inherit state for control and application default, just saying environment dark mode should be the Boolean. And if you want your
Oh, okay.
application default dark mode to be the environment, then you would still say just your default is inherent.
Oh, okay. Okay. Then I understood that. Okay.
I mean, I may have understood wrong, but I thought we were
that's
saying
fine. Well, we can do that. Yeah.
this guy becomes Boolean, and we remove this guy from the
Then
enum.
not supported. Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
And then inherits has a value of 0 because that's probably an appropriate default for most people.
No. We
No?
cannot do that.
Because
We need to. So if we don't change anything, then everything that we see it has always be an opt-in, and the way so inherited cannot be the default. The way it is now is we're checking. So not supported was the default. If it is supported, we are switching it on start on to disabled, except if you set it on purpose, because you cannot have an app that is running and then it's running under Windows 9 and then it automatically turns into dark mode. That would break things. We cannot do that for WinForms.
It's just saying disabled to become 0 and the default, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I was gonna say it seems like for control you can just say it's disabled, and
But for controls, it's inherits, and then because then
Fair
it's
enough.
ambient, and it's clear that it's ambient.
Okay.
all right. So we want disabled, enabled, then inherited as 0, 1, and 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just pasted something in chat, which is kind of like modeled after how the rest of WinForms seems to work. Like, why do you need to know inherits? I mean, I know why that state has to exist, right? But for background color, for example, there's no try-state, right? Background color has a value that is basically, if you don't set it, it's read from its parent. And if you set it to something and you want to reset it to the parent, you just call reset background color, and then it goes back to whatever the parent has.
It's true. The reason that we did it was that because of consistency for the property. I mean, if it is inherits, if you set inherit for the application and you say inherit for everything else, then it's kind of self-describing. Although for control, then it is somewhat redundant. Yes, I would agree to that. Yeah, I mean, but then do you want to have a different enum for the default dark mode for application and
Like, if you look at the thing I just pasted in chat, I just have bools. I just have a public static bool dark mode on both application and control. And then application additionally has dark mode supported, which might be false because the OS doesn't have it or whatever. And then by default, you set it to whatever you want to initialize it. And control, like the root control, like the form or whatever, would default from whatever the application is. Everything else defaults to what the parent is, right? That's kind of the normal behavior.
The problem that I have with this is that it kind of precludes the ability to do a theme change on the fly if WinForms ever does get support for that. Because if dark mode is just a Boolean, when you're going through and you're updating all of the themes dynamically, or updating dark versus light dynamically, you get to this property, it returns true or false, and then you ask, was this an override or did it get it from the parent? And you don't know the answer.
But why would you need to know that?
Because you need to re-render the control based on whether dark mode has changed or not for the application. And if you don't know if the control has manually taken over the property value as opposed to inheriting, you don't know if the control should be re-rendered or not.
I mean, maybe my mental model is wrong, but I would normally say, like, if you design your app, like by default, you never want to override this property at a control level, because then, because you basically say do whatever the rest of the app is, right? Except for this one control where you really want it to be dark mode, or really want it to be light mode.
It would be the designer, yeah.
Yeah, in which case you, by definition, exclude that subtree now from picking up ambient changes, right?
But how do you exclude that though?
By just setting
by setting it by setting it deliberately. I mean, this is how it
Yeah.
works today, and so I would say I agree with Emma on that. So that wouldn't really make a difference.
And if you look at a
Yeah.
normal form, right, and you go to random control, by default, you never set a background color. So if you set the background color on form, everybody has their background color now, right? Unless you have one subtree where you say, I want this to be purple. Now you set it purple. Well, the background color for the form changes. You don't react to it because you said, I want this subtree to be purple.
So there is still some internal inherit state, just not exposed through the public API.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we don't think
so
there's. Yeah, go
the
ahead.
problem is that we might run into, but that's a general problem with ambient properties that was there from day one.
Right.
You can test that with a back color, for example.
Yeah,
There are scenarios when we are not, properly picking up the ambient state on initialization, because the problem is that we don't have something like a transaction inside of initialized component where we wait until every property is set, and that makes it easier or somewhat more reliable if we differentiate between the state inherits and then enabled or disabled, because it's like an extra safety net, if you will. Because what happens is that we cannot control right now when the control that you're instantiating gets parented. And then it really is a matter of dependencies that we cannot control of the properties, because the moment I just set up like 5 text boxes and they're set to enabled or disabled, then I don't really know what that is until they get added to the parent and to the parent and to the parent. And then there are states where they null themselves out. So they will get the default value for a moment, but then they get parented to yet another nested control. That is the actual commander of the mode, and then everything changes back on initialization, and that's a problem then. If we have a separate state then for enabled or disabled, then that's like the ultimate gospel, if you will, and then those things cannot happen. And especially for dark mode, that's something that feels safer. But it is a general problem in WinForms already, and I have thought about addressing that. But I mean, with WinForms, you need, on the other hand, always to be very, very careful what you're changing, because you can easily break the change with like some subtle change. You break the world. So
I think my point in general is if you have inherits, you kind of need another property that tells you what the current state is, right? Because otherwise the caller says, oh, you set it to inherit. Now I have to do whatever logic you have to determine the actual value, which is what you generally don't want, because now everybody has to replicate your logic, and if your logic changes, then stuff probably doesn't work properly anymore. So that's why if you don't have that, well, then there's only, well, it's either on or off. You can always query it, and how it's computed, you don't care. And for a given subtree, you either say, I set it explicitly, or you reset it to whatever the default is based on inheritance, right? Which is kind of how background color works today as well. Now, if you don't want this, I'm still fine with saying you expose it as multiple properties, but it still seems like ultimately those would be Booleans. Or at least some sort of maybe nullable Boolean or something, but I don't know, like an enum seems just heavy-handed. Like, I don't know at this point, because you basically only have so many states.
Yeah, true.
And I mean, like, ultimately the way your feature works is you have dark mode, it's either on or off. That's all you have. You don't have light mode versus dark mode versus high contrast mode. Like, there's only dark mode is on or off. That's pretty much what the feature is. And then there's just a policy that determines whether it's on or off for a given control.
Yeah. I mean, we have a little bit of precedent with the checkbox that can have tri-state, and then we have an enum that reflects those three things, because they have been defined at a point where there weren't, I mean,
nullable Booleans,
generics, let alone nullables. And then the other thing is that I don't really know if, I mean, since we rewrote the designer and the code generator, so it's based on Roslyn now, I think nullables shouldn't be a problem, but with code model, which was also really early, I'm not sure if we can serialize nullables and be, able to round trip. I mean, it's not a problem with .NET, but if someone then wants to, take a definition for a form and puts it back to framework, I have no idea what happens.
Right.
So, yeah. So my stomach says I would still prefer the inherits for dark mode, the not supported flies out, but the Boolean, I don't know.
Can we copy and paste then the things we can actually edit the API to see what properties would you then have on application and control? So we would remove not supported from the enum.
Yeah.
And then you still have so application colors is kind of separate.
Yeah.
I think that was my proposal that you didn't like, right? So I'm not sure that's worth having, but like the application colors is different. So you still have default dark mode then and set default dark mode.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you wanted to debate between your two booleans versus the tri-state.
No, I'm trying to understand like with the removal of the not supported.
So
do we still have all these properties? I guess the answer is yes.
And we would also have then system dark mode. I mean, while we at it.
Yeah.
All right, so we're changing environment to system.
I think that's what we said. Yeah, and then is dark mode enabled? Does what?
Yeah. Well, it does give you. I mean, that you can query that at any time and see if the dark mode is enabled.
Well, but that's kind of so. It's the same as basically the. Yeah, how do I put this now? So the OS has support for it, but it's off. Then is dark mode enabled would say false, right?
No, it's just the inherited case. If you take it over with inherited from the system, you cannot use the default dark mode to actually test if it is enabled because you wouldn't know. And so you need the is dark mode enabled in that case to actually know if it is enabled or not.
It does that.
If set default dark mode is no longer bool, can it just be a setter on default dark mode?
It could, but it's just breaking the existing system for how we are dealing with the other application properties. The same with high DPI mode could also be a setter, and we talked about that like for as long as I'm with Microsoft. I wanted to do that, and then I would like to have it that way, but we have it with set default font, we have it with high DPI mode, we have it with a couple of other.
But so there's an application.default font property with a getter, and then an application.set default method.
Yes, and the same with high DPI mode.
Where's the default font property? I'm not seeing it in the list on the left.
Isn't it there?
Nothing. There's nothing that says default.
Okay.
It's on the control apparently.
Oh, but okay then.
So application set default font is
but
setting.
But it is with high DPI mode, and so is there there were others.
Yeah, it looks like the properties are exposed on control, but the setters are on the application for some reason.
Yeah, there were others. I mean, we can take a look at the screenshot that I had initially. So there were the whole list of.
But if our goal is consistency, then is are all these in the right place? Is set default? No, it doesn't matter.
Okay. Alright, so yes, padding can be removed safely, which I guess has to go in a diff block. Alright, so I think we're good with application.
Yeah.
Modulo application colors, which we haven't seen yet, but we'll get there.
So for control, dark mode is actually a getter and a setter. And then I have a set dark mode core. That is if you want to inherit a control and then implement your own dark mode rendering, then that is something that you can override then and then, set up for whatever you need. We also have a dark mode supported property for the control that is queried so that more or less the infrastructure can query a control and, ask if the dark mode is supported. And then again, is dark mode enabled on control would just, get it back, get the actual state back for the actual control.
Why do you need the per control support for dark mode? Why can't you just say, well, if the control doesn't have it, it's just a no-op if you set it to dark or non-dark?
So I had the third parties in mind, and I'm not sure if they would probably need a more granular way to actually integrate their existing controls into the new API concept. The problem is always that this doesn't happen probably from one release to the next. So I could as well think that so it just takes a while to get there. And then the idea behind it was there might be cases where we just don't have fully supported controls. We even have that in WinForms right now where we're thinking, so the old calendar control or the that is a Win32 wrapper, you just cannot style it at all. I mean, you cannot style even, you cannot change the font even. It's an accessibility nightmare. We cannot, size up the font. We cannot change the colors. We just cannot do anything with the month calendar control. So definitely the answer to that thing would be, sorry, that thing is not supported. We can just not do it.
Right, but who wants to query this? Who's ever going to call it?
So I would say third parties might call it when they have a dependent, when they have an inheritance tree of base controls that they then might be at some level need to know if if something that they're based on is supported currently or not.
So-
That was the idea.
So
behind it.
what's the implementation of this virtual? True or false?
What currently?
Are you default saying dark mode is or isn't supported?
I think it is.
Because if you
It
say
is-
the default's true, then what you're saying is people need to update their libraries to .NET 9 to override a property to say I don't support the thing that you were already calling, which means no one's going to care, so no one would set it to false. And if you set it to false, that means you're overwriting it on every control that's built in the box to say true, which feels like that's just maintenance burden on everyone for a thing that probably no one's going to query. I would just cut it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, you basically introduce a failure mode, right? Because if you say dark mode supported false, presumably set dark mode would throw an exception, right? So I think, I mean, your explanation makes sense in the sense that, there's an ecosystem delay by which they will support it. But I think you're better off if somebody sets dark mode, that shit doesn't explode, right? So in that sense, like, yeah, if they don't support it, nothing's going to change, but like at least nothing is going to explode, right? And then the component vendors, if they have theming support, they could just randomly say we map dark mode to one of those themes that we have. It happens to be dark, right? And then that's just the behavior that do it by default, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's like it seems like if you do this thing, so now we have a very complicated policy of when can I set dark mode and what are the consequences of it, right? Because now if you have a control tree in the middle, somebody says I don't support it. Well, can the children say it's supported, or is it disallowed? If they set it to inherit, what does that mean? Do they now say false? Like you basically get out of this entire business if you don't have that mode.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, and what is the Boolean return from set dark mode core?
That's a good question. The current value.
It was the same thing. So did it succeed or not? But I mean, in that way, I think we scrubbed it for application, and then we can do the same thing here and make it a void.
Well, I guess the intent is that you can override it, right? So I guess if you're Dev Express, you could override it and say somebody sets dark mode. I guess no, you don't return dark mode, right?
Right.
You return.
Like the only thing I could think of is you'd say if they return false, then the property setter doesn't change the value of the getter.
Yeah.
It's like
Correct. Yeah.
They overrode it and said no, so read the getter again.
Yeah.
Like I said be dark mode and it says I'm still light mode, and you're like be dark mode. It's like nope. They keep saying they're rejecting the setting.
Like, why
I mean, the thing is that
why wouldn't you just have a virtual on dark mode changed property, which is what we normally have for everything else?
It's like the Win32 API works almost in every place in the same way, like that when you call it an API, if the function succeeded, it returns.
Yeah.
So
yeah, well, I get that, but I mean, I'm just saying, for every other property that we have in WinForms, usually there's just an on XXX change that you override. So if you're a third-party person, you would override that and then react to that and set your theme property to something dark, let's say, right? Does that make sense what I'm saying? It's like, I don't understand why you need the set dark mode core at all. Like what you need is notification, right? That somebody can react to this being changing.
yeah.
But isn't that like the typical notification mechanism in WinForms?
No, it's you have an on XXX change that is virtual that you override.
Yes. Okay.
And then there's usually an actual event called dark mode change that you can subscribe to.
Yes.
And the virtual just notifies the event, and then the component vendor basically gets to override the virtual and can decide what they do before and after the event is raised.
That's true, actually. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah.
Which seems more like what you want here. Like it seems weird to me that you would intercept the setting and then not apply it.
that?
Yes, and then there's another virtual called on dark mode changed.
On dark mode changed, yeah, that's true. And also, I mean, that isn't so far good, because if we ever would have the pickup of the system changing, then we can just delegate it down until it's there, so the infrastructure is then already in place
So
for that.
like, I don't think you would want the event handler of dark mode. You would just have event handler.
No, it's just event handler, because you can yeah.
And then
Because
on
then-
dark mode change, this takes the event arcs.
Yeah.
You want to know the setting, you ask the property.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, we would
okay.
not be able to. I think we would not be able at this point to do the generic event handler still.
Yeah.
Because that would still mess up the Visual Basic code generator for.
Yeah, it's also not used anywhere else in WinForms. I think all the
Yeah. Initialize
They all-
component. Yes.
Fair enough. I see some of them actually have event data, but
yeah.
I think
Most of
they're
the properties
not
they
attached to
don't.
properties. So like it's on
Yeah.
mouse move. There's no property
Yeah.
telling you the mouse moved, so you have to get the mouse event arcs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So chat asked, and I missed it. Sorry to pop back to application. Now that system dark mode is bool, do we want to system dark mode enabled, system is dark mode, or just say like screw it, we're done talking about it?
I mean, I would say I would align them, right? If you have system dark mode, it seems like you want dark mode rather than, or you say is system dark mode enabled, then you have is dark mode enabled. But like these two properties should have the same, right? One of them is it's just that one should be prefixed with system. But they basically both say the same thing, right? One of them is for the current, the other one is for the rest.
So
Yeah.
you want that?
I mean, that's kind of consistent with the
Yeah.
yeah.
It's consistent. Yeah.
Then my last question is like, why does it have to be virtual and control?
Which one?
Is dark mode enabled? I thought this is purely derived from the dark mode property.
Yeah. Shouldn't they just set dark mode back if they want to reject it and their
Well-
dark mode changed?
Well, yeah, but if you have inherited for dark mode, then
Yeah.
still you need to find out if it is enabled or not.
Sure. But why is
Right,
it
but
virtual?
It seems like the policy that you would implement for that should be not overridable.
Your
Like, there should
virtual
be
is
one
gonna
policy to determine how inheritance is being determined, right?
like your virtual is gonna ask the current property, and if it's inherit, you're gonna go to control.parent, and eventually you'll hit application.
Yeah.
Like, where's the virtual come in? Who's overriding it?
So what if? So if I'm Dev Grape City, then I may have implementing my own engine for being in dark mode, detecting dark mode, if I want to reflect that.
Well, I would say I don't think I would do it like this. I would basically say there is a WinForms notion of dark mode, which is basically on or off, and then component vendors have two choices. They can either completely ignore it, or they can somehow map that dark mode to the things that they have.
Mhm.
Everything, because otherwise it's like it seems like you end up in a world where your policy gets so convoluted that it seems hard to reason about what is happening. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I mean, they can still control what happens when the control is in dark mode, right? That's what the virtual notification is for.
Yeah.
They don't get to decide how WinForms determines whether a control is in dark mode, because that's purely a function of those properties. And that's a fixed policy for everybody.
And they would just have to do, if they have their own notion of dark mode and they want the is dark mode enabled property to work, when they set their thing into their dark mode, they would set the WinForms dark mode
It
to
is a dark
match.
mode. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I agree. Yeah.
Okay. We cut something. But I don't remember what it was. Okay.
So, Windows introduced new Win32 APIs for setting, well, those things. Windows border color, Windows caption color, Windows caption text color, and those APIs are mapped to those new APIs, and the names of the enum are exactly the same as in Win32. There's a list of, if you scroll up, first of all, there's a little demo that shows you how
Other scroll up.
how you how that looks like. I mean, a little bit more. There's some that one actually, the GIF where you see that there's like now the title bar that is flashing the color. What you can also do is like influence how the rounded corners are done, and the color of the text inside of the bar, and pretty much just like the desktop Windows Manager APIs in Windows with the DWM set window attribute, and then the options that you would pass are what is listed there. It's basically a mapping of those things, and they're like part of the dark mode, because otherwise you would have the original color of your window, which would not be dark mode. So that is the reason behind exposing that.
And why are there methods? Why are there not properties? Everything on form that controls colors and other things is just properties. It seems reasonable wanting to read it, right?
It's a good point. I think, I don't know, it never occurred to me. Yeah.
Are you able to read the values back out of Win32? Is that why they were setters only?
I don't know by heart, but I mean, since I set them deliberately, I mean, I can store them, and so I can always report them back.
But can't someone external to you also set them?
But that's true for all of
I
it.
don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, yes.
Sure, if you use Win32 APIs on the other side, and then you ask WinForms what background color is, that's not going to be pretty.
Oh, you won't give the correct value at that
I don't
point?
think so. It's just WinForms returns whatever the object model has.
Okay.
But if I can read them, and I may be able to do that, then it could be a property. If I'm not, then it should remain a method. I would need to look that up. But if I have, I mean, this is experimental. if I have the freedom to change it without coming back to you guys, I mean, that's an implementation I can do in like 50 minutes. It's not a problem. I would actually prefer that to be a property if I can read that. So, yeah.
I mean, it seems like everything else would have the same problem, right? I mean, if you have a background color, somehow you decided what the background color is. And even if you can't read it from Windows, I mean, that's the thing you use, right? So it kind of
Yes, I mean,
like...
caching is the problem. I mean, people really do a lot with p-invoke in WinForms, and so there might be, you know, doing that from another point, and then we wouldn't know, or would no longer be in sync.
Right.
But I mean, if I can read that, then yeah, that's not a problem to change that. Yeah.
Well, if your policy is already that you don't reflect things that are done externally to you, then so be it. Right?
Yeah. So then but if it is a property, then do we want to have like an on window border color changed and the correlating events? Because then we should also make it bindable, which makes sense. But if we do that, the infrastructure in WinForms is that we need the correlating event for it. So everything in WinForms becomes bindable when there is a correlating window border color changed event. If there isn't, you cannot bind it.
Seems reasonable to me. I mean, that's one of the other reasons why making it consistent with what's there makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. So back color is where I just started looking, and back color doesn't seem to have an event.
I think that might be on the inherited thing because form inherits from everything else.
Oh, because it's override back color. All right.
Yeah. Because everything is a control, right? So, I think control ultimately.
It's on control, yeah. Back color would be on control.
And those only make sense on form because they don't make sense for nested windows.
Yes.
Okay. So, changed into properties and left a note that you should add events.
Yes.
Do we really want the Xenon to be nested?
Well, no. But we weren't there yet.
I'm sorry, that might have been just a copy-paste problem. So this is not, that's not nested.
Right.
And now it can be a property. Whoa. I assume we'll just name it window corner preference.
Yeah.
We could call it corner preference, but...
And everything else is window prefix, so might as well.
So, well, wait. Sorry. It's on form, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's only on form. So should we repeat the window really, or should there border color, caption text color, and corner preference?
Is a window and a form the same thing?
Well, a window is always a form, but a form is not necessarily a window. A form can also be, oh, I see. A form can also be a control. And that, and in that case, those would be null ops. Had to be.
I mean, you already
Because
have form border style on form, so maybe we should replace window with form.
Yeah.
Given that
Yeah.
the top level thing in WinForms is form, and WPF it's a window.
Yeah.
even though in Windows everything is a fucking window. Which is not really helpful.
I mean, the type, form, border style doesn't look like it would answer these questions, so I don't think we want to use the form border style.
But I mean,
type,
I think
but if
it's
you're just
about
saying
form border
prefixing,
style.
No, I'm just
I think
saying the
it's called-
prefix, like the naming convention exists. That was my point, because the form border style controls the border of the form, which is the window. So you could say, well, if you call it form border style, you should probably call it form border color, right? Because that's the equivalent thing for that.
Yeah.
so you want to replace window with form.
Correct.
Okay, but I thought that I heard the argument. The reason for putting window here is because it only applies if the form is itself being a window and not being a form within some other form.
Yeah, but that's fine because there are other
behavior.
Okay.
There are other things that apply to that as well. So
Yeah.
Okay.
And first of all, don't do that, because why would you? But then, yes.
Okay, so are we calling the enum window corner preference but the property form corner preference?
No, I would still call it form corner preference.
Wait, what?
Both.
Okay.
The enum and the property.
Okay.
Because consistency.
Yeah, I think both Jeremy and I just got confused.
yes.
Okay.
So
Is everybody okay with these four names? Default, do not round, round, and round small.
Seems that that's how Windows calls it, right?
Okay.
So, an explanation to this one. We have in system drawing the system colors, and the system colors is the palette that is defined by Windows. For the dark mode, Windows does not expose them. So, for WinForms, we need to hard code those colors according to the accessibility standards, and the reason and that means now that instead of when we have internal things like the control renderers that like paints buttons and everything, we should no longer use, when we get the colors for painting something or rendering something, we should no longer get the system colors, but we should get the application colors, which are on application, and they're virtual because we need to overwrite them because we have two sets internally, and we can then map them either to the system colors or to when dark mode is activated, so that we are providing the whole correct set. And that automatically, if you have your own control, then it's like the inverted colors, but they still make sense. So that if you have like a text box with a certain background, and it's in dark mode, that the text box background is the, I don't know what the English term is, complementary color. Is that the same to what was there before, but with slight changes so that accessibility is fitting. That is the reason we have those color sets defined, but they're only on application. Application is singleton, and so the virtual is for internal purposes, and they need to be public accessible, but you would not be able to change them. That would be theming, and that is again something that is not supported. So in dark mode, they provide different colors, obviously, than in light mode, and we control what we are returning in dark mode to meet accessibility standards. That's the reason for that we need to have them.
So one question I have is, did you just like is application colors effectively a repeat of system colors property by property, or are there distinctive properties on this one here?
Can you say that again? Because
so application colors, all the members here,
yeah,
are they exactly the same members as system colors, or
yes.
So I thought a little bit about our conversation last time. Like, I don't think you want to do that, because basically what you're now telling everybody is that for 20 years, you did system colors dot, let's say control dark, to get the color that matches the rest of your application. But now when dark mode is enabled, that stops working. So now everybody, in order to support dark mode, has to change their code from going from system colors to application colors. That seems like now you're on the really long tail of getting everybody to change their code to make the app not look like shit. It seems you're better off just changing what system colors returns. And I understand, yes, that means you no longer get the actual system values.
No. Wait. But I mean, we cannot do that because system colors is in system component model. It's not a system drawing, right? And we cannot just change system the component model. I mean, if we all of a sudden, I mean, what is when should we return, or under what circumstances should we return different colors when we don't have the connection to the application? You know what I mean? It's like system colors would never know that it's used in the context of a WinForms app. This is a WinForms specific thing, so it is bound to the application. That was the reason we called it application.
Well, but there's only one application, right? You can't have multiple instances, right?
Yeah, but sure. But I mean, still, system color is an app. I mean, those are all static. I think system color is all static methods, and we would need to change the static methods.
Yeah, what you would basically do is you would have a code path in application when you enable dark mode that runs on startup that injects those colors into wherever system colors lives. Right? There might be an internal or a public property somewhere that allows you to replace them wholeheartedly. And so once you turn on dark mode at the application layer, yeah, system colors will now return those colors rather than the ones that are in the system. And honestly, like, if we cared enough to still give you the actual colors from the system, I would do what you currently do, where you have effectively a new type where things are instance members and you return them from somewhere, right? But I think the problem is if you do what you currently do, is basically everybody's using system colors, and now as soon as they do that, well, the colors won't gel, right? Now nothing will match, which now requires everybody, whoever uses this thing, to call this new thing just to make it look good in dark mode, which I think kind of defeats the point, right? Because ideally you want dark mode to just work. Yes, some people have to do work, but with this design, you ensure everybody has to do work. You know what I mean?
I still don't get it how you would inject, like, for the application system, only something in system color to reflect what actually that current application just.
Well, I mean, very naively, you could imagine that you take application colors, stuff it basically into system.drawing. You have a static property here, and then you just say by default, it's initialized to basically these. And when you set it, well, then it's initialized to whatever you set it to, right? So yeah, the values change, but statics are allowed to change. The implementation of these things now have to change to go via some indirection, right?
Okay.
That's basically the consequence.
How does system colors even work?
So I think the way it works is when you say color from known color, it's basically a placeholder that then when you actually try to render it, replaces it with the actual color in the system.
Oh, sorry. It reads a private property called value, which then, if it's a known
Yeah,
color.
the known color is just basically saying it's not a color, it's like look up the color. That allows them to be basically constant.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think even so at the time I did the concept, and it's quite a while ago, I think we didn't own system drawing at that point. I think that was some of the reasons that I didn't do that. Yeah, I can. Yeah.
But do you buy my argument? That I think with your design, you basically make sure that nothing is going to render for a while properly.
So I'm not really sure if I can make that work over the weekend because we're snapping on Monday. Would it be possible then to still, do those changes? Oh, well, no, that's not working. That's defined. Yeah. Yeah, I need to make that work then.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, we snap preview 7, right? Like nothing really prevents you from fixing bugs in RC, right? But like,
No, we didn't snap Windows preview 7 yet. We're snapping on Monday, so that
what I'm saying,
can.
like next week we snap preview 7, but there's still an RC coming afterwards and another RC coming then, right? So there's 2
Yeah, but
RCs.
I get that, but I really want it. So my drive behind getting it desperately into preview 7 is that I want time to have people tried it
Right.
as long as possible, and that is that. So that's my
Right.
yeah.
You can also port the change
Well, I mean-
into preview 7 post snap.
Yeah, I think one way to do it is you could just say, yes, system colors right now will return the wrong values. And in RC1, we'll fix that to match dark mode colors, right? So that, wouldn't be great, but would be a way to do it.
Yeah, true. Yeah, okay, I can figure something out, and I think I can even figure something out for now for the time being. So, but I agree with you, to be honest. Again, yeah.
All right, so we're cutting the entirety of application colors.
Let's throw out the whole application colors, and let's make system colors work both for dark mode and light mode then. Yes. Which means nothing changes, basically. It's just that system colors will report different colors in dark mode.
Yeah, depending on where these things live, if it's in a different assembly, you might need a public API to change the behavior here, but that would be just for your stuff to work, but it wouldn't be.
But
well,
wouldn't we be able to do that internally somehow?
you can. It's possible that system drawing already has, internals visible to WinForms anyway, but.
Yeah, but it's yeah. So how would system color would need to? Yeah. So could we have something like an internal property that we can?
Yes, we can make that work too. I'm just saying we try to avoid it if we can. If you already have internals visible to from system drawing to WinForms, then might as well. If you don't, I would probably prefer a public API just for sanity. But there's plenty of public APIs in both WinForms and system drawing that says infrastructure code, not intended to be used by your code, right?
Yeah, but this is something that is really dangerous because of accessibility. So we really want to make sure that this is something that cannot be changed from the outside. System colors should be defined by the system, or dark mode is the exception, but we still should. For accessibility reasons.
The way you could design the API, it wouldn't be change arbitrary colors, right? It would just be switch the colors from light to dark, and then you make sure that they're still all accessible and have the right contrast, right?
Okay.
It's just you switch between these two modes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. System colors, static, dark mode as a Boolean, and you're just like,
exactly.
Go dark.
Okay.
Which means stop asking the OS what the color is and tell them what the color is.
Okay. I make that. Then we can throw it out. The application colors then.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't look like system drawing primitives currently grants IVT to WinForms. So we're probably talking a public property. Do we want to just throw that in here, or?
See, it works for me. Yeah. The only thing to consider is if there's any reason why you want effectively a specific mode to be red, but I don't think you do. I think you, for simplicity, you just want an ambient, like it's either this or that, and then
I
all
mean,
the
you can,
colors
you
are
still
consistent.
can. I mean, it's only for the system colors, and if you want to obey by a certain standard, I mean, you can still color your theme, your control that you're custom rendering as you want, or configure it as you want. There's the back color, and there's the fore color that reflects everything else. And I mean, you just test. Am I in dark mode? And then I theme it like that. And am I not in dark mode? Then I'm theme it differently. That you can do. It's just
Well, I
that.
meant more like if there is a scenario where somebody wants to know what the actual system color for button highlight is, independent of dark mode, then you would need a different API for that. But I don't think there is a real reason for that. Because you're almost breaking into jail at that point.
Yeah.
All right. So that's
Yep.
my immediate
Yep,
proposal.
I agree.
Okay.
That works.
Okay. Visual styles.
Yeah. So the background for visual styles again is backwards compatibility. As you've seen in the animated GIF with the checkbox that is rendered as a toggle switch, or with the text box that has the bigger frame and has also a bigger padding. We need to make sure that the original implementation of a control would still be available. And also, you would also only get those like new visual styles if you really opt in. And so what we're proposing is that, so right now we have two styles in which we're rendering. This is Windows 2000, and yes, it's Windows 2000. And then it's Windows XP, that's the modern style, haha. And so now, because of dark mode and because of the challenges that we already have with accessibility, where we will be getting the new requirements, which says for some controls we need at least a minimum real estate for the click landing zone of 25 by 25 pixels, and clearly there are really a series of things in WinForms that do not fulfill that. We don't need to change everything, but for each version of a control, we need to have at least one setting that fulfills that requirement. So that is the accessibility role. And to make that work and be as backwards compatible as possible, we have like the definition and the ambient flow almost the same as in dark mode, where we said, okay, there is a default visual styles, which is either disabled, classic, or latest. That can be set, that can be queried, and then also is the visual style supported. I'm not really sure if that is. Oh, I think that is a. Oh yeah, no. That exactly. That is just if visual styles are supported on that operating system. I think there are cases.
XP or later, right?
Yeah, there might be also issues with Windows Server. I'm not sure currently, but that was. You know what? It's the same with dark mode. I think we can just scratch that because it's.
Yeah, it's basically
Yeah.
I mean, in fairness, I think you can still run WinForms apps with not visual styles enabled, right? In which case you just get Battleship Gray for everything, right?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, it's still, but to that point looks like Windows 2000.
Right. So that means we could remove is visual style supported, because for everything we actually support, it would always be say true.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And then, so when you say set default visual style mode, how is that different from enable visual styles that exist on application already?
Enable visual styles is a legacy function that we have, and that is only enabling the visual styles based on XP. What it does internally is you need to still call enable visual styles to use the Common Control 6 version, and only the Common Control 6 version renders stuff in the modern Windows XP way. It's so funny to say that. If you don't do enable visual styles, and this is right now, it's not a new API, then it is Windows 2000. So this new API would then make that kind of obsolete, because you could control everything with this setting. And having that in mind is that we would then later also have the project setting again, where we could just say disabled classic and latest inside of the project, inside of the project file, so in the CS proj or in the VB proj, so that we can configure that via the UI. So if you set it to disable, that would internally also not call set visual styles. If you would set it to classic, it would call set visual styles. And if you call latest, it would also call set visual styles. But at the same time, setting a flag for .NET 9 and beyond, that we know that we need to render things differently on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way I reason about this is I would model it as an overload to the existing public static void enable visual styles that just takes your visual style mode, right?
Yeah.
Because logically, that's what it is. You're basically saying enable visual styles is logically equivalent to enable visual styles with visual style mode classic, presumably, right?
That's true. So what is the original?
The original one is just the public static void enable visual styles, which is a method, not a property. Like that. And I think what you want is you would just want to say there's an overload now that actually takes what mode you want, because now there's more than just classic.
That's true.
And then if you're really funky, what you can do is you can default that guy to classic.
We need to do that.
And then put editor false on the existing one. Because that's
so that means enable visual styles like that would also be, use the, it's like the classic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And default would be disabled. Yeah, that would work.
Did the compiler feature prefer overload A over overload B ever come in, or is that just kind of like some find this guy?
So if you default visual style mode right now, I'm pretty sure if you call it without arguments, it will call the existing one because it's an exact match.
Yeah, which is fine, right? I was just wondering if the compiler feature we talked about was in yet.
Oh, the priority overload? Yeah, it's in.
Okay.
It's coming in C#, what is it, 13 or whatever we should?
Because we could use that here instead of EB never, or whatever it is. But anyway.
Well, I mean, EB never is just when you open IntelliSense, you don't see it even, right? Versus the priority is just, you see it, but the compiler just changes which ones they prefer.
Fair. And I guess it has the same effect anyway. So
yeah, it does, yeah.
I didn't see in the issue description what latest is for. So you said latest is the Windows XP style of doing things, right? But
No. Classic is the Windows XP.
Oh, sorry.
Style. And latest is everything that we put on top of that.
Okay. Is there ever a future where like we snapshot whatever latest currently represents, make that 2, and then latest becomes 3 or something else?
Yes. So Immo and I had a discussion, and in my first draft that I showed Immo before I presented it here, I had also a version number in it. So my original plan was to have version 10, version 12, version 14, and so on, starting with version 10. Not 9, but 10, because 9 is still
yes.
well, experimental, so it's targeting 10, and then I would also, do it every 2 versions. And also the reason I did that originally was so that if someone is relying on a certain implementation of a version of Visual Styles, they could, rely on that and not be bumped up automatically, probably breaking them. But then we talked about that actually quite long, and then we almost came at the same moment to the conclusion, well, the rabbit hole that we are going to open with that version chaos might be more, doing worse than it actually helps. And that is
so to
why...
me, the version number at the application is fine. The problem is the version number in the control, because now you have trees where part of your tree is in one version, the other part of the tree is in a different version, and now you have to reason about how they all interact with each other, and that seems like a recipe for disaster. That's why I said my preference would be to say, basically what we currently have in Visual Style modes, we are basically disabled. We have the old Windows way of doing it with basically the XP style, and then we have the added .NET goodness on top, and that one is basically always whatever .NET version you're targeting is what you're getting. So you're expected to retest your app if we ever change it to something else.
But as you can see on control, you can set for backwards compatibility reasons, you can override the default visual style on control. So if you want to base your own control on a version that you needed to have, then you just say it should be classic at that point.
But can I even do this today? Can I have a form where my button is in classic and my form is in disabled? Does that even work?
Yes, I think you can.
Well, holy shit.
I guess a better way to phrase my question would be, like, it is currently 2024. Let's say that, 2030 comes along, I'm building a WinForms app, and I want to have the visual style mode that is associated with 2024. How do I do that?
You don't. Or you run .NET from 2024.
Which will be out of support by then.
Yes.
So latest really is latest.
It's basically, the other way to say is basically disabled Windows and .NET, right? Because basically the classic is basically the Windows XP theming, and then .NET is basically on top of it, whatever additional paddings or whatever we added for accessibility, right?
So should we call them those? Because the problem with latest is if we ever invent something else, latest will be to forever. And then we have classic, latest, and better. And then classic, latest, and betterer. And we need to name these things. You can't call it latest. You also shouldn't call it classic. But because these are describing a thing. Visual styles mode disabled isn't styles are disabled. Styles are set up for Windows 2000. Really these should be Windows 2000, Windows XP, and Windows 10.
Another thing you can do, right? So like the thing you're adding right now, right? The additional padding for accessibility. Why do you put this on the same spectrum as visual styles? Isn't that almost an orthogonal independent thing?
Not necessarily, because they're blending it. Take a look at can you scroll up again to that demo that I had where I said, you can enable the accessibility stuff or not.
Right. So just as a warning, I'm somewhere in 5 to 15 minutes, I'm going to hard disappear, and I'll take the live stream with me. You guys can continue the meeting, but we basically need to target finishing in 5 minutes.
So that is an accessibility reason, but it's manifesting in a so the toggle switch is manifesting then in a visual style. It has the real estate that we need, the checkbox,
Gotcha.
but it is a visual style. So then that is why we're mixing that up.
Gotcha.
And it's the same with the text box, right? The text box is really, really difficult to differentiate when they're inside of that table layout control. And by the way, only this is possible to define the padding now. so that it actually, changes the layout on the fly. Right now, I can only change the margin and be honored by that. But as soon as I'm docking, margin goes out of the window. It never gets honored, and then I'm relying on padding. And since Textbox doesn't have a padding, I'm again bitten by accessibility demands. And so that is, again, the reason that, it looks better because it has rounded corner and fits more the style that we want to have for dark mode apps or modern apps. But then at the same time, the main driving point here is accessibility and, seeing the things better than before, because just the dark mode, and if I let the dark mode render by Windows, it's just a corner white box that doesn't do any focus indication. And by the way, it does that also not anymore for a borderless text box. So that's a problem in itself that we have already today.
So given that we're out of time, how about we approve everything before with the feedback that we have, and then we move visual styles to either email or Tuesday next week? Because
I want to snap on Sunday. I want to merge on Sunday, and the question is, can I merge on Sunday? Because then it's going into Windows.
I can try to do it via email, or maybe we set up a meeting tomorrow for 1 hour to close on it. But we're not going to do it in 3 minutes.
Yeah, okay, it's fine. Yeah, let's do it tomorrow then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tomorrow's going to be interesting because there's the morale event, so it'll have to be morning. But...
Yeah, I can find a slot. Well, worst case, we do email, or we just accept the fact that it's an experimental API and call it good too.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're saying here down is discussed but not approved.
Okay, I'm confused.
Yeah, and there's then also the invoke stuff that is the other one. I'm not sure if that takes more time, but then I don't know.
Yeah. To some extent, that's what happens when you come in very late. Like there's limited runway.
We can always bench.
Yeah, we can. As I said, we can always accommodate, but there's limited number of screws we can turn.
Sure.
You're used to dealing under pressure.
Yeah, of course. The real secret to dealing with as well is by not caring as much.
This is not German.
You still care. That's the problem, right? You care. That's why you should get it right.
All right, so MO for precision, it needs work.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
We can approve what we currently have, but it's a proof of feedback, right? So
right. So we know that it's some of the things are approved. Go ahead and do them, but there's still pending things, so it's getting called as needs work.
Yeah, let's do that, and then tomorrow we can flip it. Probably that's probably the easiest way. Yeah. It's more for our notes to make sense.
Yep, and that was my. Yep. That was my I need to leave text.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Maybe we'll continue tomorrow online, but if we go on email, then sorry, we're a little dark. And yeah, as I said, I got to run, so going to end abruptly. Have a nice day. See you all same .NET time, same .NET channel on Tuesday, or sometime Friday. That's tomorrow if we see you before then, and that's me not rushing.